Welcome to One on One. I'm Greg Bassey, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. They're all big, but we have in the house John Nanni. He is the PolioPlus chairman for the Rotary here in our region. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
So you fascinate me. You've got a compelling story about a man who has grown up with polio. And people don't think of polio. They think of this antiquated thing. My kids certainly don't understand it.
Sure.
Tell me your story.
Well, back in 1953, I was 10 months old. About 6 months before the Salk vaccine was widely tested, I came down with polio, was paralyzed from my neck down for about a 6-month period. But I was very fortunate because my great aunt was a nun, and she had spent most of her time as a nun in hospitals and could read a hospital chart. And it was a polio ward. There was a major breakout of polio back then. People were frightened and really didn't know where polio came from and a lot of things like that. But she saw that I wasn't getting the care that I needed, and she knew of Sister Kinney's physical therapy program. Sister Kinney was a nurse from Australia. In Australia, they call their nurses sister. And so my mom took me out of the hospital. She did Sister Kinney's physical therapy on me, stretched my muscles. Fortunately, I was too young to remember all the pain that my mom would tell me about. And about a year later, I took my first steps and grew up pretty much where most people did not know I had polio. Again, I was fortunate because my mom did that physical therapy. My muscles didn't atrophy. And so I played baseball, basketball, and football in high school. However, my coaches didn't know I'd had polio, and they always called me lazy, and
Right.
I was slow and uncoordinated. But I got to the point where eventually, when I turned 40, I started having renewed weakness, pain, fatigue, sleep apnea, which about 40% of all polio survivors have. Unfortunately, because most doctors hadn't seen polio in many, many years, it took 2 years and 10 different doctors to get the diagnosis of post-polio syndrome. And basically what that is the muscles that took over for the damaged ones, the nerve endings and things like that, they start dying off early from overuse. A good example of that is President Roosevelt. Back in those days, they didn't know a lot about post-polio, and the logical thing was, you have weakened muscles, let's build those muscles. And down in Warm Springs, Georgia, they actually destroyed his muscles. His first term, he was walking around with crutches.
Yeah.
Okay. And towards the end of his life, into his last term, they were carrying him around. And that's basically what happens, is the old adage of use it or lose it has to be changed to conserve to preserve. And so that's basically my life. I have to avoid overuse. I have to avoid resistance exercises. When I go to physical therapy, if it's a new therapist, I basically have to train them, because the logical thing is, let's weaken the muscles. And so I do now what's called deep water running, where I get up to my neck in water,
Right.
and run in place. So I use the buoyancy of the water and get the movement, but not the resistance building muscles, and I get the cardio that way. So I've been very fortunate, but this is a small example of what basically happens to somebody with polio. I'm now in this wheelchair for most of my mobility. I still do about 200 to 300 steps a day to protect my ability to transfer from chair to the bed and that kind of thing, because I don't have the upper body strength to pull myself up.
Right.
So in about 10 years ago, I got involved. I was asked to talk to a Rotary club because they knew I'd had polio.
Yeah, you go around and you're very inspiring in these speeches that you give.
Well, it's one of those things. My talk is usually the three P's in my life: polio, post-polio syndrome, and Rotary's PolioPlus. And Rotary got involved with polio way back in 1979, where they helped the Philippines eradicate polio. And that was really the first test to show that if you isolate an area and vaccinate all the children, you will eradicate polio. And then in 1985, Rotary started what's called PolioPlus. And they're geared to vaccinate as many children in the world. And then in 1988, we joined forces with the World Health Organization, CDC, UNICEF, and then about 10 years ago, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation joined, and that's called the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. And they basically coordinate all aspects of eradicating polio.
And he talks about that a lot, his work in Africa with eradicating polio. And just having to negotiate these different groups that run things in these different countries to get in there and do the vaccinations. It's been such a frustrating thing politically for him to get in there, and they have great progress, and then all of a sudden there's slippage and people come up with polio, and people are baffled. Everything in the world thinks polio has been cured, but it's not.
Well, polio is a very tricky disease. It's a virus that not only lives in humans, but also in fecal matter outside of the humans. So in poor sanitation areas where the kids are playing in these sewage areas and things like that, lakes contaminated and water supply contaminated, you have this combination. For every case of diagnosed polio, there's as many as 200 cases of people walking around that are contagious and have very little or no symptoms at all.
Right.
So the combination of those factors makes it very difficult to eradicate, especially if you can't get into the area. For instance, in Nigeria, for years we had trouble because of the Boko Haram. That stopped us from going into certain areas to vaccinate children.
Right.
One thing that Rotary is very involved is in the peace movement, and that peace movement has been able to create days of tranquility in those areas to allow our vaccinators to go in and vaccinate children. With that coalition that I explained earlier, Global Polio Eradication Initiative, we vaccinate more than 450 million children a year in developing countries. And so it's a very hard thing in Pakistan and Afghanistan, where that's the only two countries that polio exists in today. You have the Taliban and not allowing vaccinators, and actually some vaccinators being killed because of political reasons. Hopefully, in the near future, that will end. We've made inroads with the Muslim imams to issue fatwas for vaccination rather than against vaccination. And so the combination of what Rotary does and their partners really starts focusing in on where that virus is hiding. And hopefully within the next year or so, we will have 0 cases of polio.
And the Gates Foundation, which has given millions of dollars, also has a matching program?
Yes, for every dollar that Rotary raises for PolioPlus, they add $2. So for instance, a $25 donation becomes $75 with the matching money from the Gates, and over 100 children won't get polio because of that $25 donation, up to $50 million that we raise. So, for instance, last year we did meet the goal of $50 million as Rotary raising for PolioPlus, and the Gates Foundation added the $100 million, so it's $150 million. And for the next 3 years, the Gates Foundation has committed to that, and Rotary made the promise to kids of the world back in 1985 that we will eradicate polio, and we are going to eradicate polio.
I remember lining up in elementary school, 4th or 5th grade, and getting the 2 drops.
Yeah, they called in many areas on Sundays. They would open up the gyms. They called it Sabin Sunday.
Right.
Okay, and people would flock to it. I truly wish today we had the same enthusiasm about vaccines,
Yeah.
which is one of the problems. You know, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, they have the internet, so they see through the internet all the anti-vaccine vaxxers, their propaganda, and that really has hurt our effort to get people. There's been an increase of people opting out in Afghanistan and Pakistan because they have bad information. They don't have scientific information. They have people's opinion.
Right.
And on the back of my chair, I have a sign that says 66 years later, this is what polio looks like when a child's not vaccinated. And it's my message to try to get out there to the people to vaccinate. Not too long ago, I had a woman come up to me. She had tears in her eyes. She goes, "Can I take a picture of the sign on the back of your chair?" I said, "Yeah, what's wrong?" And she says, "Well, my daughter-in-law refuses to vaccinate my grandchildren,
Yeah.
and I want to show her this picture." And unfortunately, there's pockets here in the United States that have less vaccination rates than India, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Afghanistan. And that's a problem because, we're only a plane ride away from polio returning back here.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And that message on the back of your chair is so powerful and so simple, and it really works.
Yeah. I get a lot of people to comment on it, thank me for it. I've had some, not confrontations, but discussions with people. And I just ask the people, show me the science. Show me the science where vaccines cause problems. There's one study back in 1999 that had 12 kids in it by Andrew Wakefield, who was a doctor in England. And it got a lot of press throughout the world. Unfortunately, 6 of the 12 kids already had signs of autism. Okay. Yeah. The study was paid for by a law firm suing a pharmaceutical company. He was stripped of his ability to practice in England medicine, but he lives in Texas in a mansion and paid by anti-vaxxers to continue the negative things. There's a study out now, million kids, half the kids were vaccinated, half the kids were not. There's more autism in the cases of the kids that weren't vaccinated.
Right.
To me, that's the science. So
Right.
I ask if people show me the science.
Right.
So
You lived a lot of years without the polio symptoms, came back as post-polio. How did that develop? Was it fast like with Franklin Roosevelt? Was it something in the back of your mind like this could happen? Or was it slow? Did you know it? What was that transition
no,
like?
I mean, back in 1992, when I started showing, when I turned about 40, I really didn't know why I was tired and getting pain and things like that. I had hurt my knee, and I thought maybe that's some of the things, and so it was very, very difficult. It was a slow progression, and what people think is the polio comes back, and basically it's not.
Right.
The virus doesn't come back.
Never goes away.
Right. The virus is gone, but the symptoms of the damage that the virus did to the nervous
Right.
system. And even those people I talked about that are 200 cases that had no symptoms at all, a lot of them, 40% of them, actually have post-polio syndrome. And because they didn't know they had polio, they never get the diagnosis of polio. Often, like in my case, I was originally diagnosed with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. Symptoms are very similar, but the treatment is completely opposite. With those two, they want you to build muscle and exercise and really work out heavily. And those people who didn't know they had polio and get those kind of diagnoses, it's counterintuitive, and they really do get damaged, and they don't know why they can't get better. So it's one of those things that is a mystery of why. But there's many symptoms. One of them is sleep apnea. About 40% of all polio survivors have some kind of sleep disorder, and many times it goes undiagnosed. In my case, I needed, back in 2006, I needed a triple bypass. I don't have heart disease in my family. I didn't have bad cholesterol or triglycerides. It was from an undiagnosed sleep apnea. And like I said, 40% of polio survivors have some sleep disorders.
Yeah, the cardiac damage from sleep apnea is amazing.
It is, and people don't realize that, somebody who is snoring and they really don't know they're waking up, and usually it's a spouse that really pushes them to go to the doctor and finally get diagnosed. Basically, the waking up like that, stop breathing, and your system automatically wakes you up. It's the same stress on your system that causes same as smoking, and so it's a silent killer.
So it comes back, and or your symptoms come back,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think if it's me, I'm going to be pathetic and sad, and just think my life is over. But it really invigorated your life.
Well, it was one of those things. I slowly got into the thing where I was fortunate to find doctors. I found a doctor. His name's Dr. Richard Bruno. He's up in North Jersey. He now is not seeing patients for polio or post-polio syndrome, but he does consult with the patient's doctors, and he's on the web and polioinstitute.org, and he's incredible. He basically saved my life. He taught me that I needed to slow down or find different ways of doing things other than going to the max and stressing my body out. I have to rest a couple times a day, usually at 10 o'clock in the morning for 20 minutes doing nothing, and usually at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Prior to that, I was hitting at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was hitting the wall, and where almost dropping kind of thing. I was so tired and
Right.
didn't know why. And then with his help, I learned why and was able to make the changes I needed to do. And I have to eat a lot of a high protein diet because protein reduces fatigue. And so a lot of little things that I have learned through Dr. Bruno. And I'm on the board of a polio support group that for New Jersey and Delaware, and advise on a couple of other polio support groups. Many of them on Facebook, and it's Facebook gets hit a lot with negativity. But with me, I have 5,000 Facebook followers.
Yes.
Okay, but with 10 posts, I can hit 20,000 Rotarians and 10,000 polio survivors, and talk about these kind of things where people start identifying that, oh geez, I need to make changes in my life. And a lot of polio survivors learn the right way, and in my case, the right way for me is being in a wheelchair so that I don't overuse my body. I have a ramp van. I have 118,000 miles on a 3-year-old vehicle, but some of it is going to Yankee games. So, it's one of those things, like I said, very little I can't do. I just have to find a different way of doing it. And it's better than sitting at home doing nothing and sulking and saying, woe is me. And Rotary has given that to my life. Rotary has allowed me, prior to becoming a Rotarian, I did volunteer work, but being a member of an organization that has 1.2 million people and 6 areas of focus that really focus in on helping the lives of many people, because I can fall back on that whole system of 1.2 million people, my efforts are magnified many times over, whereas without an organization like Rotary, I wouldn't be, my efforts would be just my efforts and not beyond the scope. And organizations like Rotary with, there's a world's greatest meal to help end polio. It was an Australian Rotarian and an English Rotarian. They're friends, they got together, they had a meal. They fought over the bill. The one who lost the bill says, "Okay, the money I was going to pay, I'm going to give to Rotary's PolioPlus."
Yeah.
And that started the world's greatest meal to help end polio. And through Facebook, they've raised in the past 5 years enough to vaccinate more than 17 million children. And that's how powerful Rotary, Facebook, social media can be.
I get worried that too many people think Rotary is just a bunch of old guys sitting around having lunch once a week, but it's way more than that.
Oh,
As a Dale Carnegie disciple, I'm big on his preachings, and the four-way test matches the stuff that I believe. So talk about the four-way test and how it affects your life.
well, I became a Rotarian 10 years ago, and then I found the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And I actually wish I had had when I had my business, which I was forced to retire to because of the polio. I wish I had the four-way test in my life. And basically, if you come to a fork in the road and a decision to make on whether it's business or personal decision or whatever, if you apply the four-way test in it and you can really get as close as possible to truly match that four-way test, you can't go wrong with your decision. And it's been something that I've looked at very, very hard and have changed many aspects of my life because of that four-way test. And in my Rotary Club, Middletown Odessa Townsend Rotary Club, or commonly known as the MOT Rotary Club,
Right.
We have a group of people that are dedicated, and like I said, it's not your grandfather's Rotary Club anymore. We have young people, we have women. I don't know where Rotary would be without the women in our clubs. And 2 years ago, we built a $500,000 all-inclusive, all-accessible MOT can-do playground, okay, with the help of other clubs in our district that had done two other can-do playgrounds, one in Wilmington, one in Milford. And it's amazing to go to these playgrounds and see these kids, able-bodied kids playing with autistic kids, playing with kids that are blind, playing with kids in wheelchairs. And one of the things that I love is the fact that I'm in a wheelchair, and most people don't think about the parents or the grandparents, so they can interact with their able-bodied children in these playgrounds. That's just one aspect that this Rotary Club of 33 people was able to get grants and things like that to build such a playground that Easter Seals sends their kids to play on, and many of the schools that have disabled children or mobility challenged children actually bring to their playground. So that's one of the aspects that Rotary has been very good. We paid for 4 water wells in Tanzania a couple of years ago, and these water wells where in the villages the mothers and the children had to go twice a day, 5 miles to go get polluted water.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the villages the year before had lost 10 kids to crocodiles. Okay. Now with the clean water in those villages, they don't have to do that, and the kids are getting clean water and not getting sick from polluted water. So a small club like that, you multiply by 35,000 Rotary clubs and 1.2 million people, you get a lot of positive things that happen in the world.
And in our community, we've got 3 Rotary clubs, and they each fit a certain demographic, like a social demographic. And it's just fascinating to do all 3 because they're different kinds of people with different purposes, but they're all united in the same goal of improving our communities and building the fellowship.
Yep. It's a lot of fun, and it's you get a lot of great satisfaction to know and see what the good that you can do. And then a lot of times the things that we don't do, like for instance the 4 water wells we built, we will never meet those people, but we know we did good in that community, in the world. So.
What's next for you? What do you want to do to further this?
Well, I want to see the Yankees win the World Series. No.
A lot of excitement here today with the Nationals.
Yeah, with the
winning.
Nationals.
Yes.
Congratulations,
Yes.
Nationals. But I think my efforts won't stop until we have the last case of polio, and then the world will still need to vaccinate for at least 3 years after that. so that we know one of the big aspects and most costly aspects of the fight to eradicate polio is environmental sampling, environmental surveillance, to make sure that that polio virus is not lingering in sewage treatments. So there's a lot of work to be done. You know, as we say, we're this close to ending polio, but there's a lot of work to be done. There's probably almost $5 billion from now to the point we eradicate polio to end this polio. But after that, in North America, there's more than 2 million polio survivors, and throughout the world, about 20 million polio survivors. And although we've really worked hard to vaccinate as many children as possible, we missed a lot of people that we didn't have access to that got polio. So 30 to 40 years after they had polio, they're going to have post-polio syndrome aspects. And so I feel that my job is to get the information out to the individual polio survivors, the families, and also medical people on what polio is. I had my hip replaced last November, and I was fortunate to have a doctor that knew about post-polio syndrome and made sure that the anesthesiologist knew about post-polio, because anybody who had polio, their bulbar region of their brain was affected, which controls the breathing. And there is a danger with a polio survivor with anesthesia, and it's important for the doctors to know. My doctor refused to have anyone, including nurses, come into my room that didn't read up on post-polio syndrome. So those kinds of things down the road that we need to take a hard look at and make sure that kids are, and with Rotary PolioPlus, I hope down the road, once polio is eradicated, they change it to Health Plus, because the Polio Plus program has helped eradicate or stop, like the Ebola in Nigeria. They utilize the Polio Plus infrastructure with the people and everything to literally stop Ebola 2 times now in the past 3 years from becoming a pandemic. With polio vaccines, they give vitamin A supplements, and that saved 1.2 million people from dying from those aspects. So there's a lot of positive things down the road that we can branch off from the knowledge and the infrastructure that Rotary has helped build with Polio Plus to help other aspects. One of the things that Gates is very big on is malaria. When we do these NID vaccination campaigns in areas that have malaria, in addition to giving the drops to the children, they also give mosquito nets to cut down on the malaria. So those kinds of things are in the future with Rotary.
If people who are watching want to help, where do they go?
Rotary.org. With polio, it's endpolio.org. And again, for every dollar, it becomes $3. $100 becomes $300, and 500 kids won't get polio. And it's a very positive. One of the things that people don't realize, if you go to Charity Navigator, which evaluates nonprofits, we're number 1 in the world of any organization, any nonprofit, because almost 100% of the money that's given to Rotary gets to programs. Very, very powerful.
He's John Nanni. He's with Polio Plus with the Rotary, and we're thrilled that he was here today. Great story. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent Newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.